Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started here in just a moment. I'm going to be talking to you and I want to hear back from you. My only way of getting any feedback is to see you in the chat. So, Michael, good afternoon. Thanks for joining. But please interact with me. I'd love to hear from you. Put in those emojis, say hello. Great to see everyone. Awesome. Love it. Hello. Welcome, everyone. Got a lot of good representation across the country and outside of it, and internationally as well. So welcome. Thanks for interacting with me. I hope we can make it a little more fun. All right. Well, let's get started. We're about a minute after. Let's jump in. Hi, everyone. I am Christina. I'm the VP of Product here at Uplevel. For those of you who don't know, Uplevel is an engineering insights platform that empowers engineering teams with data-driven insights. Personally, I have a background in engineering. I've been an engineer, and I've kind of ebbed and flowed between product and engineering throughout my career. I've largely been focused in the developer tool space, first on an internal tools team, building internally for the company that I worked for, and then later shifted into building for a wider developer audience, building larger software developer tools. Anyhow, I'm really excited to speak with you today about measuring engineering productivity, as it's something I've thought a lot about for a majority of my career. And I really, really believe that you can build healthy team cultures and ways of working that create high performing and empowered teams through data. So before we dive in, I want to talk a little bit about some historical context and help us think about kind of how to build high quality engineering teams. So I want to share this timeline, and let's have a short history lesson. So this timeline shows that we didn't really enter the modern age of computing until the 2000s, which is only 20 years ago. And that was around the same time that the public cloud became available. And previously, computing was incredibly expensive, and our big limitation there was how quickly we could build on hardware, how quickly innovation happened within hardware. That was our limiting factor. And so now it seems like we have unbounded compute power for relatively cheap, and it's really the number of people who can build software that is now the limitation. And as for modern development practices, we didn't really start talking about these until 2009. And it wasn't until 2014, which was only 9 years ago, when Dora was first introduced. And so after that, it took another 4 years for Accelerate to be published, helping to spread the awareness of Dora. And even still, we're introducing new ways of measuring engineering teams using things like the space metric, which was only introduced 2 years ago. So this is something that as an industry, we're still really evolving our thinking around. Engineering leaders collectively have not aligned on or agreed on how to measure effectiveness, because this kind of thinking is still really new for us. We haven't been thinking about this for very long. And yet, it kind of feels like we should have figured this out by now, doesn't it? So, zooming out, the role of technology has drastically changed with the explosion of computing and technology. Every company has to be a software company, whether they want to be or not. That means that for many large organizations, they are learning to operate in new ways. They are learning to operate outside of their core competencies, and they have to learn how to build software. On top of all of that historical context, we've had some massive market shifts in the last 2 years, and it's changed a lot of what's going on in the industry. We went from a bull market where VC money was flush, companies were growing and spending in what felt like an unbounded way. We couldn't hire talent fast enough, and we were seeing all-time high salary numbers across our industry. Oh, and we had just navigated a global pandemic. The world figured out how to work remotely. We faced burnout, quiet quitting. It felt like our biggest challenge was keeping our people and keeping them happy. And now, in contrast, we're seeing mass layoffs across our industry, thousands of developers losing their jobs. Companies are needing to do more with less, and that once very slim, tough talent market is now flush with incredible talent. There's been a huge shift, and it's requiring an entirely new way of thinking and working. Now more than ever, high-performing teams are in demand. These bear markets bring misalignment to the surface. And in the end, it's the successful companies that will be the ones that can figure out how to do more with less, to maintain that focus on the most important business priorities, retain their people, and make the most of the time and budgets that they have. This is the state of the world of technology today. So what I want you to all take away from that context, from that history, is that this is new. It's complex. It's not fully solved yet. And if you feel like you're struggling with this, you are not alone. We don't have alignment on how to measure engineering teams. And there's a wide distribution based on where companies are at on their digital transformation journey. So I'd love for folks to share with us in the chat, or actually we're going to start a poll. Tell us a little bit about what is the biggest challenge you are facing within your engineering organization today? Product, balancing high productivity and well-being, time constraints, disparate tool sets. Yeah. Keep that sharing going. I'm going to keep moving on. But yeah, we'd love to hear from you on what you're really struggling with. So before we go any further though, I want to make sure that we are aligned on some key definitions, because not everyone thinks about these terms the same way, and that can tend to lead to misunderstanding and frustration. So efficiency is working faster with less effort or fewer resources. Within an engineering organization, this comes from finding ways to optimize, to reduce overhead, or to automate manual processes so that developers spend less time on manual repetitive tasks and more time on deeper work that provides more value to the business. The dictionary definition of effectiveness is to be successful in producing a desired or intended result. So a simpler way to say this is that you're doing the right work on the right things in the right way. And so this is felt most acutely as an engineer when you put your heart and soul into this new feature and you get shifted away from it before it's finished. And you never get to get it deployed because it turns out it was the wrong thing to be focusing on. This lack of alignment is a key source of ineffective organizations. Velocity is the speed of something in a given direction. So it's how fast your team can move towards an important initiative and how much their tools, their processes, or red tape are getting in their way and potentially slowing them down. It's really hard to run a race if you're carrying heavy, heavy sandbags. And so let's make sure we're getting those process impediments removed. So let's see, going through capacity is the maximum amount of time something can contain. It's the total available time your team has to get their work done. And so if you factor in things like vacations, out of office, meetings, different interruptions that are getting in the way of your work, you actually are greatly reducing the capacity of your engineering organization. So finally, to talk about productivity, productivity is the combination of effective and efficient effort or work. In the dictionary, it states that productivity is measured in terms of the rate of output per unit input. This can be really hard to quantify within engineering organizations because ultimately you need to be able to measure value created for the business, because the real outcome that matters is the value to the users in the company, and not that you're just building features. And so because of this, at Uplevel, we prioritize understanding efficiency, effectiveness, velocity, and capacity to tell a clearer story of what's happening within your organization. All right, so during that short history lesson, I mentioned 2 different frameworks that have been introduced in these last few years that are being used to measure engineering productivity today. So I'm going to start with those. DORA metrics are seen as a fairly accepted standard for measuring software development performance. It's comprised of 4, really 5, they introduced the 5th one fairly recently, metrics that provide insight into velocity, stability, and reliability of your systems. They look at deploy frequency, lead time for changes, change failure rate, time to restore, and your ability to meet or exceed your reliability targets. And so ultimately, what this is giving you a picture of is your operational health within the organization. If we look at the 2022 Accelerate State of DevOps report, we can see that there's been a shift over time. And we've seen a growing adoption and improvement of companies executing within high and elite tiers. However, in 2022, there's a drop off, and we're not really seeing elite have a big differentiation from high performing teams. And that's pretty interesting. And so what they talk about there is a possible explanation for that is we're seeing survey fatigue with fewer teams who are performing at these higher levels, not actually taking time to fill out the report or survey anymore. And another thing to note here is that because these benchmarks were set based on survey data versus actual computed data that's happening within organizations, it is possible that there's something actually very different going on across these benchmarks, depending on who is reporting, how they're thinking about it, and so on. So DORA metrics are incredibly helpful if you don't measure anything today, but they do have diminishing returns, because once you achieve these high levels of performance, even medium level of performance can be pretty good. You don't need to keep making them better. Making them better doesn't always help your engineering organization to operate more effectively. And so it's really, the reality is that it's only really giving you a sliver of understanding of what's happening across your engineering team performance. And similarly, I've heard from developers who are at companies who are falling and reporting that they are in this elite category, and they don't really feel like they're working on an elite team. And it's because it's only that one aspect of understanding your engineering organization. All right, space. Space is newer to the scene. It was developed by some of the same folks that created DORA, but it's meant to have a more encompassing view of that organization. So it makes sure you consider 5 different aspects of your engineering teams: their satisfaction and well-being, their performance, their activity, how they communicate and collaborate, and their efficiency and flow. So here's the actual definitions. You can go look at get this screenshot from online, and if you read the actual space white paper. But if you read the details of this, space is offering you some suggestions of the types of metrics that you want to manage, but it's not really clear how to measure each of these areas and what the right metric or the right way to measure is. Compared to DORA, DORA is very specific about what you should be measuring and what good looks like. And so we don't really have benchmarks of space metrics today, and it's leaving a lot open for interpretation. If you go and search for engineering metrics, you're likely going to encounter a lot of other things that you can measure. And you're going to see opinions on why you need all of these different metrics. And if you put all of this together, it's a lot. And if you try and track all of these things, you end up in this kind of a situation, which is definitely what we don't want, because too many metrics cannot be almost as unhelpful as no metrics at all. So on top of that, you get what you measure. And so that can have unintended consequences if you're not really thoughtful about what you don't want to. You have to be really intentional about what you want to measure and what you want to get from that. Okay, so I'd love to hear from any of you who feel like you figured this out. Maybe raise your hand in chat, send me a note. If so, I'd love to talk to you. But I'm guessing that some of you might be thinking, Christina, why do you think we came to your talk in the first place? I'm here because I thought you were going to tell us what good looks like. But we're only about halfway through. I've got more to say. But since we've been sitting down for a little bit, let's talk about that. We've been sitting for 15 minutes already. So please join in. I can't see any of you, so I'm going to trust you're going to humor me as well as some of my in-person attendees to a talk I gave last week. But I want you to stretch. You stretch for me. Hold your hands up. Give me some twinkle fingers. Okay, let's do some wrist swivels. We've got to combat some carpal tunnel, and then the other way. Shrug your shoulders and release. One more time. Shrug your shoulders. Release, shake it out, feeling better. All right. Thank you for tolerating me. I'm trusting you participated. But how do you all feel? Are you feeling better? So what I observed when I did this last week in person was that most people were smiling more than they were just a moment ago. What happened? You all might think I'm crazy, but if you did choose to participate, I bet you feel better. And we're seeing that here in the chat. Thank you. Thanks for talking to me. And I think you do feel better. One, because I took a moment to care about you, to give you some space, to take a little pause, to treat you like humans. Because people matter. The humans behind the work matters. And that's been missing from everything we've talked about so far. So as we talk and think about engineering teams, we need to remember that teams are made up of unique people. That means every team is unique. And the reality is, what good likes isn't going to be the same for every single team. What productivity looks like for one developer can look entirely different for another. And similarly, the metrics of a healthy team can look totally different within different organizations, with different missions, with different humans. What is consistent are the categories of metrics that you need to consider, and you need to understand the value of creating transparency and understanding about what's happening across your organization and how each of these unique teams fits in. So, zooming out and thinking of an engineering organization, the three categories that you need to consider are people, operations, and process. As we just experienced, people, how they are doing, how they are feeling matters. We should consider these metrics that support building healthy, empowered organizations. We've spent quite a bit of time talking about operational health. We have to make sure that your systems are stable and reliable and your tools don't hinder velocity. Finally, your process health, digging into how we're actually collaborating together and whether or not we're effective and efficient as an organization. And so it's really together that these three categories paint a picture of your entire engineering organization and start to give you a perspective of what's going great, what's doing okay, and what could use some support or improvement. So let's dig into each of these and the metrics that contribute to them. As you think about the different metrics within each of these categories, it's important to note that there are often correlations between them and between the categories. And what's missing here is the context of what's actually happening within your organization. And so you use these metrics to understand the data of what's actually going on, but you have to consider the context and how that interacts and the story that it tells. So starting with people health, this is an example of understanding deep work. So if burnout is tanking your team and like people don't have enough time to do work, or like, is there actually a different problem that's going on? Is there a big planning initiative or a strategy spike, or is this actually a sustained problem that we just aren't getting enough hours of work? Because one of the things that we've discovered at Uplevel is there's a really strong correlation between always on and deep work metrics across organizations. So what that means is if people aren't getting enough time to do their deep work during the day, they're still going to create time for that deep work after hours to get their work done, and that can trend towards burnout. Similarly, if we look at context switching, it can help you understand if your teams are being task switched too often, if they're jumping between too many projects. It combines tickets and how many projects people are working on with interruptions, chat interruptions as well. And so all of these together can be indicators of burnout, and you can use that to predict if your team is operating at whether or not they're operating at their best, because you really don't get great, effective, and efficient work from people who are burnt out. Here's another view of cycle time. So this is jumping into operational health. And many of these metrics come from DORA standards that we talked about. Ultimately, it is about how you understand stability, reliability, and velocity of your systems. And this is an example that you can learn about, like the differences in cycle times across your different teams. And so you can understand what's going on. This is where you have to integrate the context of what's happening here and understand, like, is the cycle time because of a process issue? Maybe this team is located in an entirely different time zone, and the time zone lag of getting code reviewed is really just slowing down the whole process of the ability to ship. Or is there something else going on here that they need help with? The other way to think about it is you can look at cycle time in context of what stage of development. So this first team here has a lot of open work, and that can be a problem. And so what do you need to do as a leader to go and help and support that team? Finally, we have process health. So thinking about process health, we need to know how well we're working together. So how much time are we spending on different types of meetings? Do we have a good meeting health? Or are we spending too much time in sprint meetings? Are we spending too much time in one-on-ones? What's going on, and how are we spending that time that we are in meetings? What's going on there? Do we need to make a change? Some interesting things that we've seen fairly commonly is actually companies aren't spending too much time in meetings. It is a good distribution. It is what they expect and want to see, but they're not getting enough deep work time. And that correlation usually means that calendar optimization needs to happen, that people aren't getting enough solid working blocks to get their focus work done. And really just an organizational exercise of aligning calendars can greatly address that problem. So another thing to look at is our sprint health. So what's going on? Are there any indicators? Like, how are we actually collaborating? Do we have any stuck PRs? Have we had a lot of issues added? And all of these kind of come together to give you kind of an overview of a metric of sprint health. And then finally, what are people working on? Are they the right things? Do we have too much time being spent on keep the lights on type work? Is that increasing? Is that something we need to get ahead of and start to fix? Are we actually spending the right amount of time on these really key, important initiatives that the business thinks are the top priority, but actually the reality is we're drowning in customer support issues? Having a clear picture of what people are working on across the organization is key to understanding that. All right, so now what? So if you remember our definitions from earlier, when you think about using these metrics, it's really important to understand the outcome or the impact that you're trying to achieve. What matters to you? What matters to your organization? You might want all of them, but taking them on all at once is a recipe for disaster. We need you to focus on your biggest area of opportunity. Fix it, measure the change, and then find the next biggest opportunity. When we look at metrics, it's important to take a supportive lens. You want to protect the privacy of the individual. You don't want to stack rank people. Look for ways that you can help them. That helps teams feel empowered, and you want to empower them to solve their own problems, give them cover. With more data comes great responsibility. And so it's really important to use it wisely to empower rather than micromanage. Create transparency and visibility across your entire organization, because by creating a shared understanding of the biggest challenges that your organization faces, teams are going to have more buy-in as you try and roll out process changes. Ultimately, as a leader, you have intuition. You know when something is not right. Back it up with, trust that intuition, but back it up with data and be humble enough to challenge it if your intuition is wrong. Okay, we made it. We got through it. That's it. We've got 4 minutes left. We started by grounding in the history of our industry and realizing we're still at the beginning and that our industry is going through a massive shift right now. We aligned on definitions, making sure we have the same understanding of what those mean and that they are the outcomes that we're going to try and drive. We talked about the different frameworks and metrics that are available, what exists today, and also remembered that too many metrics isn't that great either. So ultimately, what you want to remember only this: there isn't a shared understanding of how to measure engineering teams. There are good ways that you can start to do this. There are standards that you can adopt and practice. And ultimately, you need data to make better data-driven decisions. But actually, the thing that I really want you to remember is that you need a holistic picture of your whole organization. You need to understand your people, your operations, and your processes. And you need to create transparency and visibility of these metrics to create alignment and shared understanding. And finally, use your data for good, not for evil. Don't do the shitty thing and stack rank your devs. Use it to help them, to create opportunities of improvement, and to remove barriers and roadblocks that they have. I've shown you these frameworks and numbers, but as leaders, we do have those gut feelings when something isn't going well. Back that up with data. My hypothesis of how this can evolve is that I want to see a world where we measure and take care of people and take individuality into consideration. So, what does it mean to have good engineering teams? We don't know yet, but I look forward to finding out together. Thank you, everyone. We have just 2 minutes left. I'm happy to do a very, very short Q&A if anyone has any questions. If not, feel free to reach out to myself. You can reach me at christina@uplevelteam.com, or you're welcome to join us or reach out to our team. I think there's plenty of people available. Yes, we can make the slide deck available. Do I have a YouTube channel? I don't. I think Uplevel does. I'm not sure. Cassie, if you're on the call, do we have a YouTube channel that we can link to here? Cool. Yeah, we'll send the slides out after the record and a link to the recording. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Would love your input and feedback. All right, everyone, have a great rest of your day. Take care.